Corruption continues to hinder the advancement of the African continent. Illicit financial flows amount to around 650 billion rands annually. The sum is roughly equal to the amount of international development assistance the continent receives. Joining us in studio to shed more light on the scourge of corruption is the Sanco Gauteng chairperson, Mr. Chris Malemacha. We also have Jagan Gray Johnson from the Open Society Foundation. Good evening to you, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, let's just talk about the effect of corruption. First of all, I'll ask you, Mr. Malemacha, on the continent's growth.
No, thanks, man. Let's take this opportunity to say, as civic movement, we don't necessarily address corruption as alone. We say greed and corruption. We decided to add the word greed because this is the co-founder of the activity called corruption. If we are to face the truth, if it was not of corruption, Africa should be long advanced. All whatever is in the other side of the world, you name your US, your Europe, would have been here. But because people decided to enrich themselves illicitly at the expense of the masses by ensuring that they fraudulently ensure that they act on the highest order of dishonesty and fraudulent conduct, so to enrich themselves without necessarily taking care of the masses and the development of the masses. It leaves us with no choice but to forever be downgraded and looked down by other countries in the UK. You can name your America, as if they are the only super country who are better than us. But it must be condemned with the content it deserves, because if you check all the African continents, all the African countries, many of them, they've collapsed simply because of this thing, greedy and corruption. If you go to Zimbabwe, same case. If you remember the Charles Taylor, same case. So how do you say this thing must forever be worshipped? I think the only way to deal with it is to workshop all of us and be ready to combat it, so that at the end of it, we have a better development than what we are seeing now.
Giovanni?
Well, I think certainly the facts are there to see. The fact that the last 50 years, Africa has lost close to $1 trillion US. And in that same period, if you're looking at the opportunity cost towards development, it's quite colossal, because that was actually more than ODAs, which is overseas development assistance. So again, the potential and the impact, the negative impact this has on general delivery of services, whether it's education, whether it's health, whether it's shoring up and strengthening institutions, whether it's even security, the impact that it has. It's quite fundamental, and corruption across the heart of the developmental principles and the indices, whichever way that you look at it. And so, as a result, the African Union, I think, realized the fact that this is a major impediment to collective development. So as a result, as you well know, this year, 2018, has been declared the year of combating corruption in Africa. And I think, and I hope, that this would be an opportunity for us, and when I mean us, the African citizenry within the various constituencies, whether it's at the political leadership level, at the faith-based organizational level, at the captains of industry level, through the through the private sector, the civil society, the trade unions, etc., to come together and basically devise, certain mechanisms that are already been established but not operationalized, and ensure that once and for all we'll be able to come out with a common position on certain fundamental issues that affect all 55 countries, and basically say that this is what we're going to do moving forward in order to basically stop the outflows of illicit financial flows.
Before we actually move forward, one of the things we need to actually pinpoint is why corruption has been able to flourish for so many decades in the continent.
I think the issue here is people are very strategic. These corruptees and the corruptors are very strategic. They will come with a body to call it corruption watch. What they will do, they will deploy themselves in there. Now it's a matter of a referee and a player at the very same time. So it is not easy to combat it, because the genuine, legitimate structure is not in place. Instead, they've brought a bogus structure so to ensure that this thing goes on and on and on until we ensure that we've got a legitimate, genuine structure that is inclusive, where people who have got no interest in the government, people who have got no interest in any private sector where these things are happening, are sitting in that corruption watch and are able to report. And when it goes to judicial, it gets the speed of dealing with this in a form of setting example. That's the only time we'll be able to combat this. I'm telling you that we have joined this corruption watch, AU, as you said. We have got this in all provinces, but check who's sitting there. Whoever is sitting there has got interest to protect whatever they want to continue doing. Then we want neutral people who will be able to alarm the whistle. And after alarming the whistle, we want the judiciary to ensure that a minimum sentence is set to an extent that whoever found to be involved are sentenced as per that particular sentence. And we set an example. And I fully agree that as the core destructor of the development of a human being, this corruption really deserves to be combated in a very high speed. Otherwise, this entire world is going down the drain.
So, I mean, just expand more on other corruption watchdogs that there are available, you know, who are looking over the continent, and how easily accessible are these to the citizen in that particular country? Because if corruption is actually rife amongst, you know, politicians and senior executives of the country who are not reporting themselves, can the citizens report those people to this watchdog?
Well, I think that's a very good question. But first, let me just say that, you know, corruption, there's a saying that if you fight corruption, it fights you back. And so as a result, corruption has taken many different forms over certain periods. So for example, the popular term now is looking at issues of state capture. Then there are others that are looking at tender rigging and etc. Right? So it goes through different cyclical phases, and I think maybe that is because it takes us time to try and catch up and try and understand what is happening. By the time we know what's happening, the act has taken place. Mm-hmm. So the preventive aspects of it hasn't been very effective. Now, that has to also do with the fact that at the continental level, we've got something called the AU Advisory Board on Corruption, the AUABC, that sits in Arusha, Tanzania. Most African citizens don't know that it exists. In fact, most lawmakers don't know that it exists. And it's been existing since 2009. Now, their actual existence is based on something called the AU Convention on Combating and Preventing Corruption, AUCPCC, of which 37 African countries have actually signed on to. That's a very good document. In fact, it's an excellent document. It talks about the issues around political party financing. It talks about strengthening anti-corruption commissions. It talks about whistleblower protection, all these things that we're talking about here today. And state parties are finding it difficult, whether it's through political will or they just don't have the capacity to implement the commitments that they have made towards the convention. Now, I will say all is not lost, because we can look at the examples. A country like Rwanda, for example, there is a section that talks about asset declaration of public officials. I can tell you now, and we've done the studies in various countries, Rwanda is probably the only country in the world that has almost 100% asset declaration rate of their civil servants. And the level of corruption at which it is being fought starts from the apex of political leadership, from Paul Kagame himself. And so I think, as my colleague had said here, it has to do with political will. It has to do with, again, resourcing and strengthening the institutions that have been given the mandate to combat corruption. And it also has to do with the legislative framework and the groundwork that you have to make it possible for ordinary citizens to blow the whistle on corruption. In some instances, when citizens blow the whistle on corruption, they get punished.
Or they
for fingering
disappear.
the corrupt. Yes, or they disappear. So if that's the case, if there's no security for me to be able to come out and try and elevate the demand for public accountability, especially if I'm poor, and I'm in mainly rural areas, I'm being exploited, my land is being taken away, no one is protecting me. The same people that I'm supposed to go to report to are the ones that are going to turn around and disappear me. I have no hope, and I'm not going to report corruption, even if it's happening to me and it's actually threatening my own livelihood. So these are the issues. It's about the political will, it's about strengthening institutions, and it's also creating the conducive legal framework to allow for the demand for public accountability to thrive.
So do you think that if there was zero corruption on the continent, that we would be seen as one of the first world, economies as well, globally?
Yes. That can make me smile, of course. Really, we were to have everything that we want. people were to get better services. We were to have good quality education. Because in this case, what corruption will do, people who are corrupt will put a tender as if they want to build a school. Go and steal the money which is meant to service the masses. And once they've taken the money, what is going to happen? We are going to have a society which is not educated. In this case, they will put the tender as if they want to come and put a tar road, so that the ambulances and whatever that they will be servicing the masses can drive through freely. They will go and steal that. So all what I've said is taking us backward. We now have too many people who are sick. We have people who are not educated. We have nearly each and every sector affected, not necessarily producing or doing as it is requested to do as per the Constitution. Now we are denying our own people the right to a better life. This is how corruption works, and this is how it kills the society. So if we had a corruption-free kind of country, I'll be telling you to say, we will be the best of the best. All the mines will be benefiting the masses. All the natural resources will be benefiting you and me. We'll be having all sorts of lives that we want. But with this, I can tell you that we are going nowhere. Because for a mere position to get, you have to bribe. That is corruption. And now, because you have got money, the highest bidder get the position regardless of the competence. That is corruption, and it kills the nation. Now this particular person has to perform this responsible position without prior knowledge. Then whatever that has to happen under his watch, it means it's going to be done wrongly. That is corruption. So without really standing up and moving from the documentation to implementation, I don't see us really winning here. We need to move away from this thing of having this document, talk good about them, and do as one revolutionarist once said. Remember Thomas Sankara? Yes. You know what he said? Who are the enemy of the masses? Any person who steals from whatever that was intended to benefit the masses is the enemy of the masses, because that particular masses are not going to benefit, therefore must be declared to be the enemy of the masses.
So how do we get to that place then when we move away from the big documents and summits and talking about the documents, you know, writing more documents and discussing what's inside the documents and actually acting out, implementing the solutions?
That's a good question. And I think, as I said, it would take time for us to be able to do that. But first and foremost, I think it's the political will. If you have a certain regime overseeing a certain country that is rich with natural resources, and I'll name a name, let's say Equatorial Guinea. Equatorial Guinea, for instance, has got under 1 million people as the population, something about 800,000 or whatever. On paper, per capita income is about $36,000 US. It's more than Spain and at least 3 or 4 Portugal and other European countries. But the level of poverty is so endemic that it has some of the highest poverty rates on the African continent, not the world, the African continent. On top of that also, they are the major exporter of oil. And they are flaring up so much gas that, I mean, it's totally unbelievable that they can actually use to benefit their own people. But the level of corruption that thrives in that country, it's absolutely unbelievable. So it's about political will. So if you don't have the regime that is willing to actually ensure that they combat corruption from the apex of government, it is very difficult to be able to now have functioning institutions that derive their mandate and are appointed by the very corrupt leaders that are refusing to fight corruption, and you expect them to actually carry out that mandate. It will never happen. So if we're going to move from rhetoric to reality, we have to start with political will. And it, like my colleague says, how do you do that? We make sure that we elect the right people in office. We have to make sure, again, I mean, I know it's a catch-22, we have to make sure that the corrupt practices during the electoral process is actually arrested. Because if a candidate starts out his candidacy by being corrupt because it was a corrupt avenue that he used to get to the position of power, I very much doubt that he's going to change his ways once he has access to public resources and the possibility to dispel and also to dish out largesse and patronage.
But in some countries, elections aren't even fair. I mean, you find candidates who get arrested if they oppose the so-called, favorable candidate or most favored candidate. People have opposition. Actually, it's actually hard to get a democratic election taking place in some of these African countries. So how will we even get to elect that uncorrupt leader?
You see, we will forever repeat that. It's a political will. We will never know until we realize this person is corrupt when he exercises that corruption. What we need to do is to first change the mentality of our people, so for them to understand that the position that they are contesting for, it requires them to be very much honest, not for the love of the money, if not enrichment, for the sake of benefiting the masses. If we can have the second layer of leadership who will understand that I'm here not for my self-enrichment, but to serve the masses. How do I serve the masses? Is to get every resources, channel it towards the poor, and they do that. The other thing that really needs to be dealt with away is this thing of the lifestyle audit. People who are busy orchestrating lifestyle audits are the very same people who are very corrupt. They want to put a bogus kind of committee as if it's auditing, whereas in reality they don't want it. But we want leaders who will subject themselves to vetting. That's number one. Who will declare their interest. After that, we say for a period of every 6 months, we do lifestyle audit. That can also assist. Every 6 months, we don't wait for a year. Every 6 months, we do lifestyle audit of a mayor, of a premier, of a councillor. Then we check how they live, where they get their other extra resources. If they live well, that is the only way that we can minimize corruption for the first term. But if it rolls to the second terms, I'm telling you, we can arrive at the desired objective principle to say we want a corrupt-free country, if not a continent.
And I think even transparency would be important after you do all of those audits every 6 months. Can the public actually get to know what was discovered in those audits, what actually was declared?
You read my mind. We don't necessarily do it amongst ourselves. We do it, we go and put it in the public domain so that Chris can be seen that he's passed the lifestyle audit. This has been declared, this is what has been found. Then he can proceed to another 6 months. Then if we can do that in a form of transparency, as you are correctly alluded, it can help the country, it can help everybody. So it might even reduce the number of people who want to contest for positions, because they will know that I'm subjecting myself to a very scrutinative kind of process that if I don't pass it, I'll be embarrassing my family, my friends, and whoever surrounded me.
Yeah. Jagan, you wanted to add more to that?
No, just very quickly. I mean, I totally agree with all these things. But the other thing is that, there's what we are doing is obviously the preventative measures. And also we are looking at also the transparency aspects of it through probity, right? Mm-hmm. But, you can have all of these things. But if there's one, because they work in tandem, if there's an element of accountability that is missing, if you don't start putting a premium to make corruption expensive for those that are actually engaged in the actual act, you're not dissuading anybody. So if I know that I can go and steal R1 million today, and everybody knows I stole the R1 million, but the chances are that for you to convict me, it might take 15, 20 years, and even if I'm convicted, nothing's going to come out of it, or I may just get to pay a fine of R1,000. What's the deterrent factor? There isn't any. So there has to be a deterrent factor. It's not only about the transparency, it's not only about the probity, it's also about the accountability. Mm-hmm. If we make it expensive for thieves to actually engage in thievery, yes, they will think twice.
I think actually the thieves should be the ones who are scared to walk around, not the citizens of a country.
Absolutely.
Well, we have about 2 minutes left. Can I just have closing comments from you?
No, I think in closing, what will urge all our fellow countrymen and women is that let's try by all means to combat this corruption. It is not good for our upcoming generation. And if we really allow ourselves to be this victim of this thing, we are not going anywhere. And we must tell people that it starts small. It starts from a mere accepting gift, not aware that this person who's giving you gift in the long run is going to come and say, it's time for kickback. Now I want this
Yes.
in return. He gave you a watch, Rolex for 200,000. You think it loves you? Then he comes and wants a tender of 200 million rand.
Jacqueline?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the last word really is just to say that in this year of combating corruption, 2018, we'll be having, actually, South Africa will be hosting the first Civil Society Forum, Civil Society Forum 3 in Midrand at the Pan-African Parliament right next to the Convention Center. And we've got keynote speakers from all over the African continent, including Thuli Madonsela, who will be receiving the first African Anti-Corruption Crusader Award 2018. We've got other speakers, as I said, from South Africa, academia, private sector, civil society organizations. And this particular forum will start on the 5th and end on the 6th of July. And, you know, we hope that, you know, the media, especially organizations like yourself, will cover it. And we'll hope that we'll be able to at least ventilate some of these very important issues that we talked about this evening. With some brilliant minds and a diverse audience, Africans that are coming from all over the continent. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. You can trust Afro Worldview to bring you updates from that particular meeting. It is time now for a short break, but we're back with more news, so do stay with us.